This short session will help you better understand the issues of copyright relating to your thesis. At the end of your PhD, you'll be required to submit a print version and an e-version of your thesis. An e-thesis is simply a digital copy of the finally accepted print thesis, which at Leicester we store as a PDF document. It's as close as possible in appearance and layout to the printed version. As you already know, your PhD must be properly referenced and all primary and secondary sources correctly attributed. Failure to do so can result in severe penalties or termination. There must be absolutely no confusion as to whether your ideas and expressions are your own or have come from an existing source. The Graduate School has an extensive section on avoiding plagiarism and will be happy to advise further. So, we will assume you have referenced correctly, but how about the material you are including? Do you need to consider copyright implications? In your thesis, it is likely that you will want to include material by other authors, and this material will be copyrighted. That is, the rights will be held by a third party. An author automatically has copyright in anything they write or create, and under UK law they do not need to apply for it or mark their word with the copyright symbol for it to apply. Third-party copyright relates to any material that is not your own creation or where you are no longer the rights holder. The owner of the copyright for an item is usually referred to as the rights holder. This could be the author, but for academic articles and books, it is probably the publisher. If the item has been published in an EEA country, then copyright in that item lasts until 70 years after the death of the creator. So, have you used substantial third-party items in your thesis? Have a think about your thesis and the sorts of items you've included. By third-party items, we might mean long extracts of text from works by other people, illustrations or images, figures and tables, maps and charts, even those that you have redrawn yourself, and material of your own that has previously been published. We're now going to work through this flow diagram to help you understand what action you need to take to ensure that your thesis complies with copyright rules. First of all, the same rules apply to both the print version and the electronic version of your thesis. The first question you need to ask yourself is the item you're using less than substantial? Copyright law says that less than a substantial part of a published third-party work may be copied or quoted without permission, providing it is correctly referenced. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to define substantial and really depends on the significance of the passage within the whole item. So the next question to ask is, are you using the item for either criticism and review or quotation? If you think you are using a substantial amount of published material, then you may still be able to include the excerpt providing you use one of these provisions. First of all, criticism or review. For example, if you use a long extract of text or an illustration and it is integral to your argument and not too large, then this might count as criticism. Secondly, quotation. You can quote from any type of work, an extract of text or an excerpt from a recording, providing that the use is fair. Both the criticism and review and the quotation exceptions state that any reuse must be fair. So, is your use fair? JISC have provided some guidelines on what constitutes fair dealing when it comes to copyright. Important things for you to consider are that the length and importance of the extract is limited to exactly what is needed. You should consider the amount that you've quoted in relation to the commentary and criticism that you're providing. And you must make sure that you're not interfering with the commercial interests of the rights holders. If you're unsure, it is always best to seek permission just in case. In terms of finding permission, the first thing that you need to do is check the copyright information of the item to see what you might already be allowed to do with it. You may be allowed to reproduce the material without asking permission. Alternatively, the material may be licensed under a Creative Commons license, which allows non-commercial reuse. For example, this item included in the My Leicestershire project. This has a Creative Commons license, which allows reuse for a non-commercial purpose, but with correct attribution. On websites, you might need to look under the section that says legal or terms and conditions to try and identify what you're allowed to do with the material from that website. If you're using material from galleries, museums and archives, you should contact them directly or check at the time of access. For books and journals, you should check the publisher's website for the relevant contact details. So, the steps to getting permission. Once you have identified who holds the rights, you need to ask for permission. If you're in any doubt over whether you need to have formal permission, the safest course is to ask. The permission needs to be received in writing, so a letter or email. A verbal agreement isn't sufficient. So the first step is identify the rights holder. Find their email or postal address. Secondly, formally request permission to include the item. We include a sample permission request in the handbook that accompanies this course, and you're able to copy this. Make sure that you outline what you are doing, where you are doing it, which item you would like to include, and why you would like to include it. Be polite and be brief. Make sure you keep records of all correspondence. For your own records, retain copies for at least 5 years after you graduate in case you need to refer to them again. Repeat your request after 6 weeks if you haven't heard anything. Bearing this in mind, you should leave plenty of time to get all permissions. Make sure you start early. At the point that you realise you need it is probably the best time to ask. It can be a lengthy process. If you do receive permission, then make sure you fully reference the item and acknowledge the permission that was granted. Make sure you adhere to any conditions that come with the permission. Some rights holders might request a fee to include their item. This can range from a few pounds to £50 or even higher. Make sure you discuss with your supervisor if the question of fees comes up. Sometimes researchers want to include their own journal articles in the back of their PhD. This is common. Before you do this, there are a couple of checks you need to make. You must find out which version you are allowed to include, perhaps the preprint version, the final corrected version, and so on. Check with the journal publisher or take a look at the copyright transfer form and understand which version of the article can be included. You will submit your bound print version, your e-version and your consent form at the library. The Graduate School website has links to all of the forms required for submitting your PhD. The final thesis submission form is required when you submit the final copy of your thesis. This includes a statement that you are aware of copyright and that it is your responsibility, not that of the university. There is also a request for thesis embargo form. If you think your thesis will require an embargo, you will need to put a case forward to the graduate dean. You can use this form to state your case, but you must submit it early. Do not leave it till the last minute. Talk to your supervisor if you think you will need to pursue this. When you submit your e-version, it must be in a PDF format. It's possible for us to receive it by email or by file sending services. Once it has been processed, it will go into the Leicester Research Archive and will then be searchable through Google and thesis databases such as Ethos and the Index to Thesis. If you are publishing while you complete your PhD, then please consider depositing your articles in the Leicester Research Archive. When you come to submit your thesis, we can make links in the entry to make sure people can see all of your publications. And this is how a PhD on the Leicester Research Archive currently appears. Hopefully you now have a better idea about how to seek permission for items in your thesis where other people hold the rights. If you need help, there is plenty available. Contact the graduate school if you need help with regulations. There's a plagiarism website, and all PhD forms for submission can also be found here. If you need help with copyright matters, including seeking permission, then please email the copyright team in the library. If you have queries about your thesis in terms of the electronic version, please contact the eThesis team. It is best to ask your supervisor if you need assistance for sensitive material, setting up embargoes, or any discussions with rights holders. Much more detail is contained in the Keeping Your Thesis Legal booklet, including a breakdown by particular material types, such as illustrations, tables, images, and maps. Make sure you use this link rather than downloading the file, because the contents are subject to change over the next few years.